Hello, and welcome to this poetry celebration. Today is our 5th weekly video, and we mark today the end of 4 wonderful weeks that we've spent together writing poetry, reading poetry, enjoying poetry, fostering community, and really enjoying each other's company and poetic voices. It's been such a pleasure. And I want to welcome you very much today, whether this is your first time joining us or your 5th. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Kate Chadbourne. I'm a poet and writer, and I'm hosting this celebration in conjunction with the journal makers Jumping Fox Design. Now, if you've been tuning in so far, you know that today I will be drawing out names of 2 winners. Here's the names. And each of those winners will receive a gift from Jumping Fox Design of a beautiful journal. So more to come on that in a moment. I'd love to start today by returning to the dare I issued to you last week. I invited you to choose a mentor, and that mentor could be a poet or a poem. And I had some very nice correspondence from you. Bill mentioned that it's time to get to know Robert Frost. Anne said that she was sort of dazzled by the poetry of Muriel Rukeyser, and it's time to get to know her. Betsy mentioned that she fell a little bit in love with Joy Harjo. In fact, she sent along this poem that she loved. It's called A Poem to Get Rid of Fear by Joy Harjo. And you may recall Joy was our very first poet guide. It's just a short poem, and it's a great one for now. A poem to get rid of fear. I release you, my beautiful and terrible fear. I release you. You are my beloved and hated twin. But now I don't know you as myself. I release you. With all the pain I would know at the death of my children, you are not my blood anymore. That's a poem you could live with for a long time. And finally, our wonderful young poet, Capricar, decided to choose a songwriter as his mentor, and that songwriter is Thomas Dolby, a songwriter that many of us may remember from a song long ago called She Blinded Me with Science. Capricar sent along some amazing music for me to listen to, and this is what he said. While I'm very familiar with his work already, I've been meaning for a long time to study it and truly get to understand why I love it so much. His music tends to be very evocative of stories, and the imagery he paints is particularly gorgeous. Here are a couple of my favorites as an example, which I could study for a month all on their own, I feel. I love that, and thank you everybody who commented on this. I just think it's wonderful that there are resources out there. There are teachers, and there are voices, and there are poems, and there are songs, and we can face into them and learn from them and be supported. So that's wonderful. Well, as ever, I received a marvelous trove of poems this week, and I want to thank every single one of you for every single poem you sent. I could spend entire days reading these poems aloud to you with such pleasure. It's just such a delight that my email these days has included this kind of message, this kind of email. It's been wonderful. So here are a few of these poems. My friend Jan, who is a marvelous writer, sent me first a story and then a poem that comes from that story. Her poem is called Ode to Fly, and she writes this, just to preface the poem, which you'll understand better once you've heard this. Fly has a story. We adopted him in early 2019. We had only one barn cat, the last from a feral colony down the street who had adopted us. Sadly, Midnight, that feral cat, was not the best hunter, And Jan writes that she had heard Mrs. Frisbee, meaning rats, and her whole family in the barn scampering around as she cleaned the stalls. The local shelter had rescued several cats from a hoarding situation, and they were really feral, but they needed homes. So Jan and her family were going to wait for warmer weather, but they agreed to adopt Fly and set him up in the large dog crate in the barn. The next morning, there was a dead mouse in his crate. So Fly, this half-feral cat, became friends with Midnight, their other cat, and she says, evidence of the family Frisbee have disappeared, meaning the rats. But we cannot pet him or get closer than 2 feet, which is a great improvement. She says, so I praise him. I love that. So this is Jan's poem, and it's called Ode to Fly. I pulled the hose toward me through spring grass, the copper nozzle glinting with gold as it skittered and slithered along. Fly, the cat, crouched, half hidden, staring at the strange creature snaking toward me. He slunk lower, his inky profile a shadow on the grass, tail twitching, hind quarters tense, ready to attack as the end of the hose drew closer. He moved his head ever so slightly, sending a questioning green-gold stare. Are you going to kill it, or should I? Oh, that is the essence of cat, Jan. I love it so much. Oh, so fun. A really unusual and a poem that I so enjoyed came from my friend Dave. And Dave, actually, I should say, has a practice of writing a poem every day, all year, just as my friend Trisha does. And so I loved this poem from Dave, and it's called I'm Older Than Louis XIV Was. And the little sort of addendum is to the title is Addressed to the Sun King after his death. I thought my life's been busy. Was I wrong? By the time my mother praised my first pun, when I kissed her, handed her an orange and declared, Here, Mom, now you are sun-kissed, you had already been crowned King of France. When I was just getting ants in my pants for a petite redhead next-door neighbor and daring to get on my tricycle for a timid attention-getting ride, coyly fast to avoid disappointment, so she couldn't say she didn't love me. Rumor has it your cousin was your first love, working on producing your future heir. When I was a graduating senior, you thought to commission court musicians, painters to portray you as the French state, and dance instructors to give you lessons sufficient for a 30-year career of professional dance appearances while finding time to build Versailles Palace. Now, almost 8 decades after our births, I've finally bested you at something. I've survived a full year more than you have, showing, as if it ever needs showing, that everything, even lives of sun kings, arises only temporarily. As you can see, I'm clearly not dead yet. I'm still in relatively good health. But in times like these, I can't help feeling you had much more fun than I ever will, raping, pillaging, and burning your way, molding royal Europe in your image by supplying kings and queens from your loins, tickling the fancies of fancy ladies, and some who were not, but still played the game. What a marvelous poem. And what a fun thing, actually, to write a poem addressing perhaps someone great and grand and having a relationship with them through a poem. Try it. I love that poem. My friend Jody, a harper, sent me this poem called Signs of Spring, and I love it because Jody's a great walker, and the poem gives us a kind of a primer in what sound the birds make. So listen to this, and then when you go outside later, you might think of Jody and the poem, and listen for these birds. Signs of spring. When we hear singing of red-winged blackbirds, conkaree, you know that one. When we see robins digging for worms and hear a cheery song, cheerio, cheery. When we feel tap, tap, tapping of woodpeckers on trees. When orioles and hummingbirds taste nectar in flowers. When phoebes call from yard edges, Phoebe, Phoebe. When dark-eyed juncos fly north. When wrens collect materials for nests. When goldfinches start to lose feathers and echo, potato chip, spring begins. Now, a long time ago when we began this, the very first poem I read was by a young poet called Declan. And so I thought it was only fitting to conclude our reading from our community with one short poem by Declan, because it's beautiful. And it follows on so nicely from Jody's poem. Declan's poem is called A Bird's Call. A bird's call is so beautiful and so pretty. I love it to the soul. I count on it to keep us safe. Oh, a bird's call. Thank you, everyone. Your poems are marvelous. They're wise, they're insightful, they're funny, they're heartbreaking, they're clever, they're gorgeous, and I love them, and thank you. All of them. Thank you. Well, today, so our poet guide for the day, a wonderful poet for us at this time, I think, and his name is Ted Kooser. Ted was also a poet laureate from 2004 to 2006. He's written many, many books. He's a Midwestern poet. Now, a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Wes McNair, Wes McNair is really a poet of New England, and you could say that Ted Kooser is a poet of the Midwest. One thing I love about Ted Kooser is, you know, he worked all his life as an insurance salesman. And I guess he would wake up very early, make himself a pot of coffee, I think at 4:30, and write until 7 o'clock. And he was not an academic, or he is not an academic poet. He's not part of kind of the academic world of colleges. Well, he is now, actually. He teaches at a college, but he decided in those days that the audience he most wanted to reach with his poems were his fellow insurance salespeople. And so the poems are marvelously accessible. They really celebrate the Midwest. They celebrate people there. They celebrate ordinary things that I think he's a poet rather, that you can read and right away see your own life in his poems. He also won the Pulitzer Prize, I should say, in 2005 for this book, Delights in Shadows. And we're going to come to that book in a moment. First, I'm going to read you 3 of his poems today. This poem, Valentine's, I guess Ted had he's sort of a lover of women, which is so great. I mean, he's a happily married man, but he has a whole circle of women friends. And for many years, he wrote a poem on Valentine's Day and sent it round to all of his women friends. And after a long time, you know, it started out as like a small circle, and then it came out to be quite a large circle of women who wanted these poems. And if I might say, no wonder. So I just want to read you one poem from this book, Valentine's, and it's called Splitting an Order. Splitting an Order. I like to watch an old man cutting a sandwich in half. Maybe an ordinary cold roast beef on whole wheat bread, no pickles or onion, keeping his shaky hands steady by placing his forearms firm on the edge of the table and using both hands, the left to hold the sandwich in place and the right to cut it surely, corner to corner, observing his progress through glasses that moments before he wiped with his napkin, and then to see him lift half onto the extra plate that he had asked the server to bring, and then to wait, offering the plate to his wife, while she slowly unrolls her napkin and places her spoon, her knife, and her fork in their proper places, then smooths the starched white napkin over her knees and meets his eyes and holds out both old hands to him. That gets me. That is love. That is so beautiful. Such a moment. Doesn't it make you want to observe moments in your life and celebrate them like that? So wonderful. Now, here's another of Ted's books, Sure Signs. You can't go wrong. Just read him. You're going to love him. I wanted to share with you this poem because it celebrates April, and it's a marvelous way of seeing anew this time that we're in. It's called In an Old Apple Orchard. The wind's an old man to this orchard. These trees have been feeling the soft tug of his gloves for 100 years. Now it's April again, and again that old fool thinks he's young. He's combed the dead leaves out of his beard. He's put on perfume. He's gone off late in the day toward the town and come back slow in the morning, reeling with bees. As late as noon, if you look in the long grass, you can see him still rolling about in his sleep. Marvelous. The wind's an old man in April. And finally, just one very, very short poem from Delights and Shadows. I think a great poem with which to close our poems this month from our poet guides. It's called Screech Owl. Screech Owl. All night each reedy whinny from a bird no bigger than a heart flies out of a tall black pine and, in a breath, is taken away by the stars. Yet, with small hope from the center of darkness, it calls out again and again. Do you love that? I do. That screech owl, he does so much in that poem, doesn't he? Well, Ted's poems this month give us our poetry spark. And here it is. I think Ted is a master of the title. One thing I love about his poems, the title almost never repeats any of the words in the poem itself. He uses the title space to advance the poem, sometimes by providing information that you need actually to read the poem, and sometimes by just turning the poem a little bit slightly so that you see even more in it than you might have otherwise. So I'd love to offer you that as a spark. When you write your next poem, see if you can do something special with that title space. Sometimes it's so tempting to just call the poem, something that's in the poem itself, or to just call it something that is sort of the objective title of the poem. Say you wrote a poem about a horse, you could call it The Horse. You certainly can, but it might be fun to experiment with calling it something else. See what you think. I think that's fun. Now, my friends, the time that you maybe have been waiting for, here are all of your names. Now, again, just to say, if you sent me 4 weeks of poems, your name is written on a sheet in here 4 times. If you send one, it's one. But everybody has a chance to win. I do want to say before I draw these names that everyone is going to receive a prize from me because I love giving prizes. So you will hear from me. This is not a permanent goodbye, my friends. You will hear from me, and I will be sending you a poem, sending you a prize, and probably a poem. So if you are one of the two names that I draw out, I'd ask you to send me a note and send me your snail mail address. I'll pass that along to Jumping Fox Design, and you will have something lovely to look forward to. So without further ado, here we go. Don't you love moments like this? All right, our first name is Dave. And actually, Dave was one of the poets. I just read his poem about Louis XIV. Congratulations, Dave. That's marvelous. All right, one more name. Let's see. How fun is this? And our second name is Bob. And I read one of Bob's poems last week. A beautiful poem about his father. So congratulations, Dave and Bob. Please get in touch, and I will arrange for the journals to be sent to you. Wonderful. And everybody else, I want to say congratulations and thank you. And again, there will be a prize for you, even so. So, my own journal. Again, my Jumping Fox Design Journal that has been my trusted guide and friend and home all month and will continue to be. I'm happy to say that I still have some space in it. I love showing you my contents page. You can see how it's filling right up. I haven't revised all the poems, but mostly I have. And I thought I would just read to you one more of my poems. So I've been writing a poem every day, and again, my poems, I have tried to make them all connect in some way with jumping or fox. And that's been a really nice challenge. You know, I honestly believe that we can write a poem about anything. When I was in college, I read a poetry kind of textbook that said you could write a poem about ketchup or diamonds. If anybody's interested, that is a great book, and it's by Robert Wallace. And I loved the idea that, of course, you could write a poem about ketchup just as easily as you could about diamonds, just as easily as you could about the dawn or the stars, right? We can write a poem about anything. I find that really, really liberating, and that also it's infinite. I'm doing this for a month, but I could do it for a year. You could do it for a year. So this is my poem, and I brought the two things together, and it's called Jumping Fox. Jumping Fox. Exhausted, the fox in the den's warm parlor curls into a soft red O, feathering her tail with each breath. I was the spirit of dusk, she thinks, settling deeper. I was a ruddy rush and clever teeth. I was jaunty as a jig dancer and swift as a shadow. I provided an elegant death. Now I honor the slain with satisfaction and sleep. And with that, she curled into a narrower O and leapt straight into her dream. As we all do, into our dreams. May we leap into our dreams, my friends. Now, I'd love to issue one final poetry dare, and here it is. Keep faith with poetry the rest of the year. Now, of course, you can do that in your own way. You'll have your own ideas about how to do that. But let me just give you one suggestion. You might consider writing a poem every month, at least one, but you know, one would be great. If you write a poem every month, by the end of the year, in addition to the poems you've just written, you'd have at least 8 new poems. That's worth doing. So perhaps you say, you know what, on the first day of every month, I'm going to write a poem. That would be a great way to keep faith with poetry. Another way is perhaps you decide, in addition to or not, that you will read a poem every month. One, you know, just take it on. Make up your own way to keep faith with poetry. As I think we have seen from this month, it is so nourishing. It gives us so much. Poetry is such a home for us and such company. Even when we're not together, it's company. It brings us together. So think about how you'll take that on. As always, I'm so happy to hear from you. I want to thank everybody for this time. I have loved it so much. First, I'd like to thank our poetry guides. To think back over them, we had Joy Harjo to begin. We had Carol Ann Duffy. We had Wes McNair. We had Tracy K. Smith. And today we had Ted Kooser. And I'm so grateful to each of them for their poems, their poetry, their keeping faith with poetry. It has given us all so much. We need people who do that, and I'm just grateful. I'd also like to thank Jumping Fox Design, who agreed to take on this project and who very generously volunteered to give us our prizes. You know, writing in a journal this month has been delicious, and I encourage it. This journal has been a home to so much pleasure for me. Let's keep going. Thank you, Jumping Fox Design. Thank you, Grace and Susanna and Margaret and everybody at Jumping Fox Design for doing what you do, which is important because it gives us homes for our thoughts. And most of all, my dear friends, thank you to you. Thank you to everyone who sent in poems, everyone who sent in encouragement. It has meant so much. And just thank you for being poets and for being lovers of poets and poetry. I appreciate all of you so much. This is not the end, of course. I think we'll be back here next year for another month of poetry celebration. And let's have a wonderful year of poetry. Again, just thank you. I'm wishing you so much joy in all that comes next. And all my very best wishes to all of you.